because it is now 12 o'clock noon, and Virginia Board loves to start on time so we can finish on time. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Dr. Penny Sweetenberg-Lee. I serve as the Director of Training and Alumni Development Programs for the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. And all of you know that Virginia Board is the Developmental Disabilities Council for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we are so very excited, as always, to present to you one of our alumni development programs, Training Alumni Continuing Education Workshop Session. We are happy to announce that this month we are celebrating in collaboration and in partnership with Autism Acceptance Month. And so we are so excited to have the national prominent organizations who will present with us today. Let me give you just a brief background about our alumni development programs, Training Alumni. The alumni are made up of graduates of Partners in Policymaking, our training program, and or our Youth Leadership Academy, formerly known as the Youth Leadership Forum. So graduates of both PIP and YLA make up the Training Alumni. And their mission under the Alumni Development Program is to provide advocacy trainings and continuing education workshops that are focused on the broader disability community throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. In order for us to present these continuing education workshop sessions that are statewide, we have a cadre of folks that help make up our production team. Of course, we give honor and recognition always to our Executive Director, Terry Morgan, and to members of our administration team, Ms. Tara Bethea, who serves as the Board Administrative Specialist. We are always thankful for our partnership with our communications unit within our agency, and that is managed by our Communications and Information Manager, Anita Ayers. And providing closed captioning for us today from Virginia Relay is Ms. Becky Tallarico. We have a partnership with one of the best technology companies in the Commonwealth of Virginia, BBC, known as Voigtnot Visual Communications, and our tech guru is Mr. Eli Red. In order for us to produce and process all of our expenditures, we work in collaboration with the procurement team from DARS, and we have a tremendous relationship with Mosaic Interpreting Team. And providing ASL interpreting for us today is Mr. Tristan Brown and Ms. Heather Paradise. All of our training and alumni development programs are evaluated, and Nia Harrison, who serves as the Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, handles all of that, not only for our unit, but for the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. And of course, our unit would be ineffective if we did not have Ms. Christine Jeremiah, who is the Alumni Development Program Coordinator as well as training, and Ms. Kelly Vanella, who serves as the training coordinator. So we're grateful for all of these team members. We want you to know that we're being live streamed on Facebook, and it will be uploaded to our Virginia Board YouTube page following the session. We would like to know who you are. So the first thing we want to ask participants to do is take a second and drop into the chat who you are, what your name is, and of course, where you're from. If you're from an agency, if you're from a group, what part of the region are you from? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you're an alumni, shout it out. All of you should have seen the first anonymous and optional poll that we placed in your view. The first one is about you, and it is our desire just to find out who's in the room, who's with us. And then at the end of the session, we will have a session feedback poll. And we ask if you would just stay with us to complete that poll. We would greatly appreciate it. There are alternative formats that you can request. You will drop it in the chat box, or you can contact our Director of Planning, Research and Evaluation, Nia Harrison, at vbpd.virginia.gov. agenda is as outlined. We are going to introduce our presenters momentarily. There will be a question and answer segment that is a part of the agenda. However, presenters may choose to entertain questions as they are presenting. And then following that, we will put that session feedback poll up, and then we'll come back with final remarks from our executive director, Terry Morgan, and we will close it out officially. Thank you so much. It is my honor today to present two dynamic presenters representing two national, very prominent organizations. The first presenter is Ms. Maria Town. She is the president and CEO of AAPD, known as the American Association of People with Disabilities. In this role, she works to increase the political and economic power of people with disabilities. Town previously served as director of the City of Houston's Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, advocating for citizens with disabilities. Town also was the senior associate director in the Obama White House Office of Public Engagement, managing disability community engagement and coordinating federal engagement. She has expertise in areas of youth development, leadership, and promoting college and career readiness. Our second presenter, Zoe Groth, is Director of Advocacy at Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, affectionately called ASAN. Previously, she worked as a special assistant at the Administration for Community Living and as a policy analyst on Senator Tom Harkin's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee staff. In 2012, Zoe created the annual Disability Day of Mourning Vigil, a national cross-disability community engagement. I'm sorry, my PowerPoint went off. So I'm going to go back to the previous page and excuse me. I want to go back. In 2012, Zoe created the annual Disability Day of Mourning Vigil, a national cross-disability event which commemorates the lives of disabled people murdered by their family members or caregivers. Powerful. She received a White House Champions of Change Award for this work in 2013. It is my honor to present our presenters today celebrating Autism Acceptance Month. And I would like to now turn it over, and my staff can tell me if Maria Town, president, has entered the room. Yes, I see her there. Maria, welcome to Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, and we yield to you now for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Penny. And I really appreciate the way that you said American Association of People with Disabilities. I think of as the second most important word in our name, the first being disabilities, but we are an organization for and by and comprised of entirely of disabled people, and that I'll talk about that some more in my presentation. Let me pull up my slides, and while I do that, I will provide a visual description. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here. My name is Maria Town, President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, and I am a white woman with long brown hair. I am wearing bright red lipstick and a blue dress and some pearls, and I apologize, my computer's being a little slow as I pull up this presentation. One thing that I will ask for today is I do want to make sure we have time for questions, and so feel free, Penny or others, to cut me off when I've reached my limit presenting, and we'll move into questions. So I will go into slideshow and share my screen.
We will help you. Questions.
Can you all see the slideshow?
It's not in slideshow mode yet.
but we can see it.
Okay, it's showing a slideshow mode for me.
Must be happening delayed. We'll give it a minute, President Town, and then if not, I think our guru Eli can pull it up for you.
Okay, I'm gonna try one more time.
Okay.
How about now?
We can't see it in slide
We're still
motion.
seeing the slideshow view, so I can share for you, no problem.
Okay, thank you. I apologize.
No problem.
Well, just moving quickly. So I a little bit about me. I have cerebral palsy and very proudly identify as a person with developmental disabilities. So I'm thrilled to be here with all of you and deeply appreciate the work that developmental disabilities councils do. I am originally from Louisiana. I've also spent time in Georgia and in Texas, in addition to living in Washington, D.C. And I love red lipstick, if you can't tell. So, and I've been at AAPD now for a little over 6 years.
So President Town, are you able to see it now? And
I can.
you can tell
And
Eli
Eli, you can go to the third slide because we have the title slide and then about me. Thank you. So what is AAPD? AAPD, the American Association of People with Disabilities, is a national cross-disability civil rights organization, and we are what's known as disability-led. And I'll define all these terms in the next slide. So AAPD works to increase the economic and political power of the more than 71 million Americans with disabilities across the United States. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we achieve our mission through a combination of programs and policy work. Today you'll hear about some of our programs like the summer and fall internship programs, Rev Up, Disability Mentoring Day, and our We Will Ride initiative. Next slide. So AAPD was founded in 1995 in order to build and maintain the collective organizing power of people with disabilities after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And as I'm sure all of you know, historically, people with disabilities were segregated from mainstream society, and we were also segregated from one another. There were, and still are, institutions for people with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, and institutions for people with psychiatric disabilities or mental health disabilities, as well as separate institutions and systems for people who are blind or deaf or have other disabilities. And again, that was not only a way of separating us, it was a way of segregating us. It was a way of separating us from our collective power as a community. And on this slide, I have two photos. One is a photograph from around 1995 in a march and a rally, and there are many people using wheelchairs. And in the center of that photo is a man named Justin Dart. He's wearing a cowboy hat, and he is known as the kind of father of the ADA. He traveled around the country talking to advocates to get the ADA passed and organizing, and he actually helped to found AAPD. And then the picture on the right is a group of AAPD summer interns standing on a rooftop in DC, because one of the reasons, a large area of work for AAPD is building the next generation of disability rights leaders. Next slide. So definitions at AAPD, when we talk about disability, what do we mean? We use the definition of disability that's in the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is any mental or physical condition that impacts an activity of daily living or being perceived as having such a condition. So I'll give you an example because often people are like, what does that mean to be perceived as having such a condition? If you have a large birthmark on your face and you apply for a job as to work the counter at a store, and you're denied the job because the hiring official doesn't think you can do it and thinks that you might have problems connecting with customers because of your disability, even though your birthmark has nothing to do with your skills or your expertise, you're being perceived as having a disability. We know that most people who have disabilities in the United States don't actually identify as disabled themselves. And so you don't have to identify as disabled to be a part of the disability community. And we also recognize that anybody can become disabled at any time. And I think when we define disability, it's also really important to define ableism. Ableism is discrimination against people with disabilities or the tendency to be prejudiced against and to stereotype people with disabilities negatively. For example, if you think somebody with a disability is less intelligent or not productive or has to be dependent on others, and that's a bad thing. And we know we are all interdependent. We all rely on one another to meet our daily needs. And we know that people with disabilities have a lot to contribute, but ableism, which is all around us, is consistently enforcing these ideas that disabled people have lower quality of life and are less worthy. One of my favorite quotes, which is actually by an AAPD alum, says that you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. There are a lot of people without disabilities who really miss out on a lot of great things in the world because of ableism. And we try to work to basically get rid of ableism in the world. Next slide. So some other definitions, I said that AAPD was a cross-disability organization, and that means that we work on the inclusion, representation, and support of individuals with all types of disabilities, whether it's physical, intellectual, mental health related, sensory, or other non-apparent disabilities, rather than focusing on a single condition. And the focus of our work is on building collective power. Now, I want to be very clear, organizations and people that do focus on a single condition, that's very important work. And the work of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, for example, or other autism organizations is very, very critical. And we often work with organizations that focus on one disability so that we can make sure that our work is accessible and inclusive to folks in that community. And we are also disability-led. So disability-led organizations are generally organizations or initiatives that are explicitly led by and comprised of people with disabilities. Governing boards for these organizations are comprised of at least 51% people with disabilities. So at AAPD, all of our staff are people with disabilities. All of us have different disabilities. We have many people on our staff who identify as autistic. And even for folks who have the same disability, many of us have different access needs and preferences. And our board is 80% people with disabilities. Next slide. So what do we do? One of our flagship programs is our internship programs. And we have run our summer internship program for 23 years now. It is a 10-week hybrid program for cohorts of 20 students and recent graduates. And students who are in inclusive post-secondary education programs can apply. Technical education programs can apply. And even students who are non-traditional students may have gone back to school at a older age can also apply. So our upcoming summer internship program cohort is ages 19 to 59, I believe, which reflects the diversity of experiences in the disability community. This program is hybrid, so we have 12 people who participate in Washington, D.C., and 8 people who participate in other areas across the country. We do this because it increases access. There were many people when this program was all in person who could never even apply because they couldn't leave their home state because of their various health care, or other access needs. And so creating a hybrid program allows, for example, we had an intern in California who was able to receive dialysis and work in then Congresswoman Barbara Lee's office at the same time. She would not have been able to do that if we hadn't have made this program hybrid. So interns work 32 hours a week. We provide free accessible housing, transportation, technology, and food. We try to eliminate as many barriers to the internship process as possible because we know that paid work experience is the greatest indicator of whether or not someone will go on to have a meaningful career as an adult. And summer interns and fall interns actually are paid competitive wages. They make $20 an hour. For our fall internship program, that works a little bit differently. It's a 14-week virtual program taking place during the first semester of the academic year. We have 10 students or recent graduates, and those internships are only 15 hours per week because many of our participants are still in school. And we are not providing the housing directly this time. Instead, we provide everyone with housing stipends. And on this slide, there are two photos of two of our internship cohorts. In one, there's a big group of people smiling outside, and on another, it's a screenshot of our fall interns. And after 20 years of running the summer internship program, what we have learned is that our alumni's earnings outpace the national norms for people without disabilities. How often do you hear that? So alumni of our program on average earn $35 an hour or more in full-time jobs. 75% of them are employed full-time. And for employment statistics for people with disabilities, that's incredibly high. Usually we're looking at 80% of people with disabilities not even being engaged in the workforce. And so for those of you who are students or who are recent grads, I hope that you will consider applying to either of these programs. And we recently published an impact report on our summer internship program. And so for those of you who work in the school to work transition pipeline or in inclusive employment, I hope you will take a look at this report and talk to us about the lessons that we've learned and how you might improve your programming. Next slide. So we also offer the Tony Coelho Media Scholarship. On this slide is a photograph of Tony Coelho, who is a former member of Congress, and he worked on the Americans with Disabilities Act when he was a representative. He left Congress the year before the ADA passed, but he basically was instrumental in the passage of the ADA and in crafting the ADA. And then he went on to be on the board of AAPD for quite a long time. The Tony Coelho Media Scholarship is a scholarship that supports 8 undergraduate or graduate students annually who are studying communications, media, or entertainment with the goal of increasing representation in these industries. The scholarship is $5,625. And the reason I'm putting this so far up in the slideshow is because the applications are open now. They're due May 29th. Please apply if you are in school and are studying, and it can be a variety of things. We had someone who was working on making science, technology, and math like more accessible to people with disabilities through how those concepts were communicated. And because their work focused on the communication aspect of STEM, they were awarded the scholarship. So if you think you might be eligible, apply. Don't tell yourself no. The world tells us no enough. Next slide. So another one of our programs is Disability Mentoring Day, or DMD. DMD is a large-scale national effort coordinated by AAPD to promote career development for students and job seekers with disabilities through exploration and ongoing mentorships. DMD has produced life-changing results for mentees, connecting them to full-time employment and internship opportunities. With DMD, we often work with state and local vocational rehabilitation professionals. I was like, what's the word there? Professionals, and with local school districts to connect their students in special education to local employers for job shadowing or soft skills workshops. On this slide is a photograph of students at a disability mentoring day event at Salesforce in California. And this program has been going on for 27 years now. Our largest DMD site is in Pittsburgh, which engages over 700 students in junior high and high school. And so this program is focused on younger students compared to our other programs, which are focused on older students. Next slide. One of our other largest initiatives is Rev Up, and Rev Up stands for, and if this were a slide and not a PDF, you would see a GIF that says register, educate, vote, use your power. Rev Up is our voting campaign, and it was founded in 2016 by grassroots organizers in Texas. It was specifically founded by a man named Bob Kafka, who you should all know. Bob is responsible for a lot of great things in the world, including a lot of accessible public transportation. And thank you, Christine. Register, educate, vote, use your power. The Rev Up campaign is a campaign to build the power of the disability vote by increasing civic engagement in the disability community and removing barriers to the polls. And this work is fueled by the work of local disability voting coalitions. Next slide. So Rev Up has 22 state coalitions that are Rev Up coalitions, and this map actually needs to be updated because it only shows 20. But we also have partners across 48 states, and I hope one day very soon that we will be in all 50 states. Next slide. Rev Up Virginia is one of our most active Rev Up coalitions. And so since I have the opportunity, the next statewide election in Virginia is April 21st. It's a special election where you vote yes or no on a proposed amendment to the Constitution of Virginia. And the amendment would give the state legislature the power to redraw Virginia's 11 congressional districts. So I'm not here to tell you whether or not that's good or bad. You should figure out what you think about that. But it is a very important election that will determine what Virginia's congressional map looks like in the future. And on this slide, I have information about the election protection hotline. You can call 866-OUR-VOTE to get information about your polling place or to build your voting plan. You can also visit 866-OURVOTE.org. And if you need American Sign Language, that's 301-818-8683. And on this slide is a photograph of our Rev Up Virginia members tabling at one of their events. They've got a table full of stuff. There are people wearing shirts about the disability vote. And there's a sign that says Rev Up Virginia. And how am I on time?
You're doing well. You
Okay.
have, it's 12:28, and you have until, Christine,
12:35.
Okay. Alex, I see your question, so let me get through these last couple of minutes and then we'll go to questions. Thank you. Next slide. We also have a program known as our Fannie Lou Hamer Leadership Fellows, and this program was named for Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an incredible voting rights activist. She helped to desegregate the Democratic Party. She fought for the right to vote for many Black people across the United States and especially in Mississippi. What many people do not know is that Fannie Lou Hamer was a person with disabilities. She had polio as a child, and in her advocacy was also brutalized by police and became disabled as a result. And so this program in part honors her legacy. One of the other things that Fannie Lou Hamer did was she wanted to make sure that communities could have the resources they needed to keep themselves fed. And so this program focuses on civic engagement, and this year we've had an explicit focus on civic engagement and food security. It is designed for Black disabled advocates ages 18 to 59 who are dedicated to advancing social, political, and economic equity at the intersection of Black and disability communities. Fannie Lou Hamer often worked with young people, but she began her own kind of journey into advocacy at 44, which is why we try to bring in older folks with disabilities. And I have some photos on this slide from this year's Fannie Lou Hamer Fellows who have, again, worked on addressing food insecurity in their communities. And we funded some grants for them to develop these rapid response food security networks. And so there's a photo of a woman in a wheelchair with a basket of food, a gentleman who's taking a photo of a food distribution event in a large parking lot, a woman who is presenting a check to a food bank, and another woman who is filling bags at a food distribution event. And I'm really excited. Our Fannie Lou Hamer Fellows arrived in DC today to do some work together and to go to the African American National History Museum, and I'm excited to get to meet them today. Next slide. We do, in addition to all of our programmatic work, we do a lot of policy and policy education and advocacy work. AAPD works on many different issues affecting people with disabilities, from Medicaid to transportation to employment and more. We frequently produce resources to break down current issues so that people with disabilities, their families and allies can be informed and take action. We also often work to educate Congress, federal officials, and other policy and decision makers about issues that are important to people with disabilities. So on this slide is a photograph of a large group of people with disabilities in front of the United States Capitol. Next slide.
Maria.
Yep.
That was a misquote in your time. You actually go to 12:50. So
great.
it's 12:32. So you can slow down a little bit, and we're going to merge if you want to take questions at that time as well.
Okay, thank you. More on our policy, education, and advocacy. We bring advocates to DC that live across the country to meet with their elected officials through our Disability Power on the Hill event. That's happening in May. We also produce regular action alerts and collect stories to highlight the experiences of people with disabilities to drive positive change. We submit comments, issue statements, write letters, and drive press coverage and more, all to highlight to increase the visibility of people with disabilities and what we need in order to thrive. And on this slide is a graphic from our Protect Medicaid campaign. The woman who's speaking is named Patrice, and she is a woman with intellectual disabilities who receives SSI and Medicaid, and she is one of the leading advocates trying to make it possible for people with disabilities who receive SSI to marry the person that they love without losing their benefits and to keep their Medicaid. So Patrice is dressed in a rainbow dress with a big rainbow fascinator on her head, and there are signs around her that say Protect Medicaid. There was a movie made about Patrice's advocacy called Patrice, and I believe it's on Hulu if you want to watch it. And it is amazing. I hope everybody will watch it. And on this slide, actually, you can see our website where you can view all of our action alerts. It's aapd.com/action. And we are currently collecting stories about the importance of programs funded by the Administration on Community Living. That includes DD councils. It includes University Centers on Excellence for Developmental Disabilities, because the president's budget cuts a lot of the funding for these entities. And there's a hearing in a few weeks with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so we want to make sure that Congress understands the importance of these community living programs for people with disabilities and how much we rely on them in our lives. Next slide. AAPD also does a lot of work on technology. We create resources and host convenings about technology and how it impacts people with disabilities. Right now, this is a big update, breaking news. The Department of Justice just announced that it is going to extend the enforcement and implementation date for what the Title II, ADA Title II web accessibility rules. They announced that 2 hours ago, so truly breaking news. This applies to state and local government websites and electronic information, which includes things like information about voting, information about emergency alerts, public schools and local school boards, all of their electronic information and websites. So now it'll be another 2 years until they have to be accessible. And in my opinion, this is not acceptable. We rely on technology for almost everything in our daily lives, and the longer that states and local governments have to wait to comply with these rules, the more disabled people get left out. So we'll be issuing a statement today and keep you all posted as more developments happen on that front. We also host something called the Technology Forum, the We Will Ride campaign, and the Start Access Initiative. The We Will Ride campaign is focused on making autonomous vehicles accessible from the start. Many companies that work on autonomous vehicles will talk about how life-changing they can be for people with disabilities, but really they're only going to be life-changing if they don't create additional barriers for us to use them. So we want to make sure that the vehicle is fully accessible for chair users, that the user interface is easy to understand for people with cognitive disabilities, and provides sensory input for folks who are deaf and blind, for example. And again, I said right now we're focused on protecting the Title II web accessibility rule. That's what I just mentioned earlier. Next slide. Finally, I wanted to highlight our community navigation program. AAPD responds to thousands of people on a regular basis via phone call and email. Folks contact us when they have experienced disability discrimination or need help navigating services, and we often work to connect them to local resources like many of you to make sure they can get their needs met. We don't provide direct services ourselves, but because of who we are, because of our name, a lot of people contact us for assistance, and we've recently expanded this program. So hopefully more people can get what they need. And next slide. Yes, that's it. So I hope that you will connect with us. You can follow us on social media, send us an email. I will also send a lot of links to all of the things I mentioned to Penny so that she can send out things like the application for the scholarship, information about our programs and action alerts. The one thing that I want to mention as we move into questions, because it's Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, all of our programs, all of our work includes autistic people. Zoe Gross, who you'll hear from ASAN, is actually an AAPD alum. I met Zoe when she was a summer intern in the AAPD summer internship program, and we have actually done quite a lot of work with ASAN, the Autism Society, and many other autism organizations on engaged in advocacy, especially right now for autistic people. And so when we talk about cross disability, that includes autistic people or people with autism, however you prefer to identify. And we are, as we learn more about autism and related conditions, AAPD will also adapt our work to make sure that we continue to be accessible and inclusive. So I know you've heard a lot from me, and I really welcome your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Town. Christine, do we have questions? Alex, I see your hand, and we're going to allow you to ask one question, Alex. Go for it.
First of all, I am honored to meet you, Maria Town. You did a great job with the presentation. Um, I hope I don't, you know, postpone the schedule of this. I actually have more comments. Uh, Great job with the presentation. I just to share a couple things, and I'll let other people time shine. I serve as or very least have served as a public speaker advocate for people with disabilities. I am actually a volunteer athlete and staff member of the disability supporting organization that is Special Olympics. I work at an office they have out in Fairfax, Virginia every Tuesday and Thursday. I help them create content and stuff for their website. I also wanted to mention, I'm not sure if you were aware of this, because I don't want to assume anything here. One of the I know a huge roadblock for the disability community that I actually discovered. I'm not sure if you're aware with this. This is actually one of the failings and negative attributes of former President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in that he created Section 13, I think it's 14C. Sorry, I was going to say 13,
Yeah.
14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which says you are legally allowed and it's totally acceptable to pay an employee who has a disability sub minimum wage, which is unacceptable. And that is honestly, I liked FDR. That is a president I do enjoy in our nation's history, but that was one of his failings. There have been attempts to undo that. One of them was, of course, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, from my personal favorite president in our nation's history, which is Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush. Another one was also a law and act that was passed by President Obama, which is called the WIOA, the Workforce Innovative Opportunity Act, which I forgot all the details on that, but I think from what I remember, it helps the disability community get more job opportunities in American society and also gives them methods of transportation to get to their jobs most effectively. So there have been attempts to undo that failing from FDR, but we still have some roadblocks. Um, I also
Alex,
watched
Alex,
Patrice. Sorry, I'll end it here. Sorry. My
Alex,
apologies.
yeah, do you have a question for President Town? If not, we want to just give some other folks opportunities. Alex is one of our outstanding Youth Leadership Academy alumni, President Town, and he is he's very knowledgeable. And I guess you can tell that.
I can, and
Yes.
yeah, and if I'll respond to questions, but also if there's not a lot of questions, Alex, I'll respond to what you said because I have updates to share.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess the only question I will say just to wrap things up is just how would I be qualified or how could I get involved with some of the, you know, great opportunity organizational stuff that what you're involved in does. And I also want to just thank Christine for giving us the link to that stuff. Like, how do I get involved in your organization? Just to, I guess, end it off here.
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, if anybody is in Virginia, I hope that you will participate in Rev Up Virginia. They hold monthly calls, and it's a great group of advocates. Another way to get involved, and Alex, I don't know where you are in terms of your age and educational journey, but
Um, well, to answer your question on that, I'm 26 years old, and if you didn't catch it in the comment, because I said this in the comment, chat section, no offense, just saying, I am actually a recent college graduate of Shandong University, the College University in Winchester, because
awesome.
I've officially been done ever since December 19th of last year. Granted, I still need to do the walk, the ceremonial
Uh-huh.
graduation walk, because that's not until me-wise until May 9th of this year. But yeah, I'm pretty much, at least for now, because it could change in like the near or far future. We'll just wait and see. But at least for now, I'm done with my entire school experience as of today,
Well,
minus the graduation ceremonial walk on May 9th.
you should definitely apply for one or both of our internship programs. And I believe that both of those applications are closed right now. But we'll make sure to get the information to you all when they're open. And then again, take action with us. Get onto our email list is the best way to find out like opportunities for engagement. With our policy team does regular webinars on policy issues like 14C. And when we go to the Hill in May with advocates, one of the bills that we will be championing is the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, which would get rid of 14C nationwide.
And that's good to hear. Just to briefly mention this, I look forward to hopefully um, doing more research and getting further into your extraordinary internship and organizational opportunities. Because believe it or not, I'll just briefly say this. Me and my parents are actually trying to help me find a full-time job now that I'm out of college. And I feel like this might be a good angle or opportunity I could take advantage of that might might give that to me on some level, but at any rate, I look forward into going into further detail into this.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. Are there other questions? We have about 5 minutes, give or take, and then we're going to shift to our second presenter.
Yes, Dr. Penny. So one of the questions that we have is, among AAPD's policy priorities, which issues are most urgent in 2026 and why?
Medicaid, Medicaid, Medicaid. I mean, I just can't say it enough. So, I'm sure most people on this Zoom are aware, but in July, Congress passed HR 1, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which cuts $1 trillion from Medicaid. And those are the largest cuts in the program's 60-year history. These cuts are going to be implemented in a few different ways, but two of the biggest ways are through the introduction of work requirements and through the introduction of 6-month redetermination periods, meaning that people who receive Medicaid through Medicaid expansion, I want to be clear, through Medicaid expansion, will have to basically prove that they still need it every 6 months as opposed to once a year. And for the work requirements, this is really important information that all of you should know. People who are on SSI and SSDI are exempt, and people who are medically frail are exempt. The problem is that there is not a clear definition of what medically frail means, and states will be allowed to create their own definitions, which is going to create some chaos. And if folks will remember when the COVID vaccine first came out, each state had a slightly different definition of who could get it first. And I'll use myself as an example. Again, I have cerebral palsy. At the time, the CDC said that people with cerebral palsy were at very high risk of getting COVID and having long-term effects from COVID. Indeed, one of the first people to die from COVID in Louisiana was a woman who worked for their governor's office on disability affairs, April, and she had CP. Anyway, but in some states, folks with CP were not prioritized to get the vaccine, and in others, we were. And that's going to happen with Medicaid too. So these new changes will start January 1st of next year. And for some people, that might seem like a long time away. It's not. It could be tomorrow, and it's coming fast. And states do not have the resources to implement all of these changes. And many people, including people with disabilities, are going to lose their health care because of administrative errors. And so because of all these cuts to Medicaid, we are worried about hospitals closing, especially hospitals in rural areas. And we are already seeing states making big Medicaid cuts before they've even had to start. So Idaho just made big cuts to their Medicaid program. Maryland, your friends next door, the disability community is really fighting big cuts to their self-direction program. And Medicaid is not just a healthcare program. Medicaid helps people with disabilities live in our communities. It's a civil rights program. And it's also an employment program and a mental health program. And unfortunately, because of the way that it's written in statute, it's also one of the easiest programs to cut, which is why we always have to defend and protect it.
I appreciate that very much. What can folks do? So folks that are listening to us today in this session and on Facebook, what can they do?
So there's a few things. One, you can get prepared. So for the work requirements, again, there's going to be some exemptions. You should have your documentation ready. And when I say documentation, I mean documentation of a few things. If you receive SSI or SSDI, make sure you have your documentation that says, I've got SSI or SSDI. If for your disability diagnosis, make sure you know where your write-up from your healthcare professionals are that states your diagnosis. And if you let's say again, you're somebody like me, if you were diagnosed when you were little and you're now an adult, if you can, and I know this is hard, if you can, go get an updated diagnosis because we don't know if they're going to require updated diagnoses or if they're going to accept diagnoses that happened 20 or 30 years ago. So the thing to do is get updated diagnoses if you can. Finally, if you work, if you volunteer, or if you are in school, make sure you have that documentation. In states like Georgia and Arizona, we actually know who have already implemented work requirements. We know that many people lost access to their health care because of administrative errors. And so the best thing that you can do is get prepared. We also know that a lot of people with disabilities don't have access to accurate documentation. So get ready now. That's one thing you can do. The next thing that you can do is actually be in touch with your state Medicaid directors and your governors to encourage them to make these exemptions as broad as possible. Again, what I said, states get to determine a lot of how this works. States could make sure that they're talking to the Social Security Administration to automatically exempt anybody in their state that gets SSI, automatically exempt anybody that gets SSDI. They don't have to create a new process for people to submit documentation. They could make the medically frail definition super duper broad. So again, more people can keep their health care, but advocates need to say that to them. Finally, states have to make sure that all of the information about these changes is accessible. And disability advocates need to be able to say what accessible information means to you. So will you need this information in plain language? Will you need this information via video or via graphic communication? States need to know that because if this information isn't accessible and people lose their health care, that's wrong. And so at AAPD, we're trying to provide CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, with that kind of information. But the state government of Virginia needs to get that as well. Is there anything you would add to that, Christine or Penny?
Or Terry, our executive
Terry.
director is here in the room. I'd like to yield to her.
Yes, of course.
Maria, I think you're spot on. I think that there's a lot of fear and concern because there's also so many points about Medicaid that are unknown. There hasn't been a great deal of transparency about how it's going to necessarily impact, people more broadly. So, that fear creates, just real concern in everyday life. So I think people being prepared and sometimes it's taking action that makes us feel more, kind of settles us a little bit.
Absolutely.
So taking the kind of action you're talking about gives us some control.
Right.
So I think it's tremendously important. We're still trying to, parse out what it means for Virginia right now. We don't have a budget. There's a delay in that. It's we don't know exactly when there will be a budget and what all of the ramifications of that budget and what those cuts will mean. So we're trying to really stay on top of that. But this practical guidance and advice on what people can do right now is really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. And AAPD did a webinar about a month ago on the Medicaid cuts. I can also make sure you have that link. And we have a resource that kind of breaks down these changes and when they're going to occur and what people can expect. So I can make sure you have all of that as well. Terry, your remarks reminded me of the quote and that said, bravery is not the absence of fear, it's acting in the presence of fear. And the whole point of these cuts is in part to instill fear so that people don't act and the government can spend money on whatever else it wants and not on healthcare, right? And
Spot on.
yeah. And so
Spot on.
we need to act even if we're scared and even if we're fearful. So thank you.
Yeah.
At this time, we can entertain additional questions after the second presenter. But it is now 12:55 and we're right on time. We'd like to turn it over now to Zoe Gross. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi, thanks so much. Let me just quickly share my screen. All right, can everyone see my slides?
It's loading.
There you go.
Yes,
You're ready.
we see it.
Okay, great. Um, okay, so I'm Zoe Gross. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN. As Maria said, I'm also an alumni of AAPD's summer internship program, which really helped me get my start in disability policy. So thank you to AAPD. I'm going to start by going over what autism is, then I'll talk about what ASAN does, some of our policy priorities, and how you can get involved. All right, so let's quickly go over what autism is for Autism Acceptance Month. Autism is a disability. It affects how we think, how we communicate, and how we interact with the world. We may think differently than other people. For example, we may have very strong interests in things that other people don't care about as much as we do. We might pay close attention to details. It might take us longer to think through a problem and come to a solution. We might have trouble with executive functioning, which is like how your brain organizes itself. So things like starting and stopping a task, switching between tasks, making decisions about what to do, and in what order you're going to do the things, those are all executive functioning, and that can be really challenging for us. Routines are important for many of us. Sometimes it can be hard for us to deal with surprises. And when we get overwhelmed, we might not be able to process our thoughts or feelings quickly, which can make us lose control of our body. We process our senses differently. We might be extra sensitive to things like bright lights or loud sounds. We may have trouble understanding what we hear or what our senses tell us, so like interpreting what we see or hear. We might not notice if we're in pain or hungry, interpreting our internal sensations. Sometimes autistic people do the same movement over and over again. You may have seen people flap their hands, for example. That's called stimming, and it helps us regulate our sensory input. We move differently. A lot of autistic people have trouble with fine motor or gross motor. Fine motor is the little hand movements and other small movements that your body makes, for example, handwriting. Gross motor is the larger movements you do with your body, for example, running or walking. And both of those things can be challenging for some autistic people. Some people feel like their minds and bodies are disconnected, so they may feel that their mind is telling their leg to move, for example, but their leg doesn't move. There's some kind of like difficulty getting instructions all throughout the body. It could be hard for us to start moving. It can be hard for us to stop moving. Speech can be challenging for autistic people, and that is in part because it requires a lot of movement and really like intricate movements of like your lips and tongue and your throat and other muscles that all have to work together to speak. That's very complicated for many people. It's not something that comes easily. We communicate differently. So autistic people may talk using echolalia, which is repeating things we've heard before. We may plan out what we're going to say in advance. Some autistic people use alternative and augmentative communication, or AAC, to communicate. For example, typing on a computer, spelling on a letterboard, or pointing to pictures. Some people might communicate with behavior or the way we act. Not every autistic person can talk, but we all have important things to say. We socialize differently. Autistic people may have trouble following social rules that non-autistic people made up. We might be more direct than other people. We might not make eye contact. We may have a hard time controlling our body language or facial expressions, and that can lead other people to misunderstand us. Sometimes we're not able to guess how other people feel. That doesn't mean we don't care how other people feel. It just means we don't know and they need to tell us. And some autistic people are very sensitive to other people's feelings and moods. And we might need help with daily living. This is for many reasons. One is because of that executive functioning challenges I talked about earlier. Another is just because autism is a developmental disability. In developmental disability, it's really common to need help with activities of daily living, like eating, dressing, transportation, going to your job, or starting and stopping tasks throughout the day. That's related to our disability. It's also very common among developmental disabilities. So we may need support from another person, either at some times during the day or all throughout the day, depending, and some people don't need support every day. So it just depends on each person what they need. Autism is genetic, but there is no one autism gene. And that's basically all we know right now about what causes autism. So if you've heard someone say confidently that it's caused by something else, for example, like a specific medication or parents doing XYZ when they're pregnant, that's not true. All we know is that autism is caused by many genes that all play a part working together. Some people, for example, in our government recently, have been saying that vaccines are linked to autism. We need to be clear, that is not true. Vaccines are safe and effective. They don't cause people to develop disabilities like autism or other disabilities. That's a myth that was started by a doctor in England who lost his license for making stuff up in his fake studies, which is important for people to know. Autistic people are part of every community. So we are, there's no limit on who could be autistic. People of all ages, all genders, all races, all religions, all backgrounds are autistic. Sorry, I'm hearing a voice. Autistic people are part of every community. Not all autistic people have a diagnosis from a doctor. Because of myths about autism, it can be harder for autistic adults, autistic women and girls, and autistic people of color to get a diagnosis. We're starting to see those gaps close, especially gaps, racial gaps in diagnosis. So it used to be that clinicians were more likely to diagnose a white child than a child of color with autism. That's starting to change. But especially among older autistic people, people of color are underdiagnosed compared to white people because there used to be very much this bias in clinicians towards diagnosing white people with autism and people of color with different disabilities instead. So remember when Maria talked about how important it is to have documentation of your disability so you can retain your Medicaid? For many autistic people, we just don't have that documentation. We were never formally diagnosed. And because of that, many of us who are on programs like Medicaid expansion, qualifying for other reasons like low income, are now at risk of losing our health care and support that we need. There's no one way to be autistic. You can't look at someone and tell whether they're autistic, although sometimes you can get a pretty good idea by how someone acts or speaks or things like that. But you'd be surprised, who you meet who is autistic and not. You can't tell by looking, but all autistic people deserve acceptance and inclusion in society. All right, I'm going to talk now about ASAN. ASAN, or the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, is a policy advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. that's run by and for autistic adults. Like AAPD, all of our staff are disabled. In our case, all of our staff are autistic. That's not required, but it is true at the moment. If you're thinking of working for ASAN, you don't have to be autistic, but currently all our staff are. And it's very important to us that we be autistic led. So our executive director, our other director level staff, and our board of directors, all autistic people. We feel that all autism organizations should have autistic leadership. If they don't, they're missing out on an opportunity to truly practice supporting the community that they serve by empowering their leadership. So if you are involved with an organization that works on autism policy, check out their leadership and find out whether they are autistic people or not. ASAN has many different values and positions, which you can find on our website, but I'll also summarize them here. We believe self-advocacy is for everyone. No one is too disabled to be a self-advocate. And that's true whether the only way you self-advocate is by pointing at what food you want or refusing to go out the door if you don't want to leave the house, or like other ways to communicate through your behavior. It's true whether your self-advocacy means giving speeches at the United Nations, which our previous executive director had the opportunity to do. Self-advocacy is for everyone, and it looks all kinds of different ways. We have the right to make choices. That right shouldn't be taken away from us. I'll talk more about that later. And we deserve access to communication so that we can self-advocate in the most effective way possible. That means that non-speaking people deserve first-class access to alternative means of communication like AAC, and that we need to do more research to learn the best ways of teaching people to use AAC so that more people can have access to communication. We believe nothing about us without us. This is a slogan of the disability rights movement, and specifically the self-advocacy movement. What it means is what I was saying earlier, where people are making decisions about autism and autism policy. Autistic people should be there in the room, making the decisions, calling the shots. This is true about policy, so laws and rules that affect our lives. It's also true about research. When you see a lot of people researching autism and they'll say, here is the thing I want to know about autism, and they never ask the autistic community, what do you want to know about autism? And because of that, a lot of research about autism has to do with things like what genes make us autistic, or what are some ways we might be forced to not appear autistic, or can you scan our brains and tell if we're autistic? And those are not all bad research questions, but they are so dominant in research, they get so much of the funding, that research questions that are more important to autistic people don't get funding. So what we want is a research agenda that is set by the autistic community ourselves, not by non-autistic people deciding what they think we need to know about autism. We believe disability rights are civil rights and civil rights are disability rights. Our marginalized communities' struggles are connected to each other. So for example, if you look at the issue of police violence, about 50% of people shot and killed by police have disabilities. Police violence also very much disproportionately impacts Black people in America. You may know of the movement Black Lives Matter, which exists to point that out and advocate for change. This is an issue where Black disabled people are kind of caught in being affected by this issue in multiple ways. There are many issues like this where it's a disability issue that disproportionately impacts people of color, or disproportionately impacts women, disproportionately impacts LGBTQ disabled people. So everything from guardianship impacting someone's right to transition their gender, to restraint and seclusion in school being used more often on people with disabilities and also on communities of color. Our struggles are connected, and it's more important for us to work together now than ever. I will say, related to that, many people don't know this, but autistic people are more likely to be LGBT than non-autistic people. We don't know why this is, but it is the case, and there's research backing that up. So if you want to advocate for the autistic community, you have to be okay with transgender people and competent talking about trans issues, and supportive of the trans community. There's no way to advocate for autistic people while you leave trans people out. We believe in full community inclusion, inclusion in school, inclusion in work, and inclusion in housing. This is as opposed to segregation from the community. So many people have the belief that autistic people belong on special farms where we could be taken care of and no one else has to see us, or in special schools where they can just focus on autism and therefore they can teach us in the best way, or in special jobs where we only work with other disabled people and non-disabled people are in charge of us, and then we don't have to interact with the community. That's not true. That's not good for us. Segregation leads to abuse and neglect. And it leads to poor outcomes in many other ways, poor educational outcomes. People in segregated work environments are supposed to be training to progress to community integrated environments, but they never do. People in institutions are often abused. We just know that segregation leads to bad outcomes for people with disabilities. So ASAN believes in inclusion. All right, here are just a few of our policy goals. We want to expand home and community-based services through Medicaid. So what are home and community-based services? These are services that help people with those daily living tasks that I talked about before. So someone coming to your home, helping you get up in the morning, helping you have breakfast, helping you get dressed, keeping you on task so you can accomplish what you want to accomplish throughout the day, helping you stick to your routine, um, making sure that you eat and sleep when you want to, helping you if your body gets stuck and you can't move, helping you get out of that state. All kinds of things that autistic people need help with. And many people, if they don't have that help in their homes, they would be forced to go into an institution or maybe to get that help from a family member. And then we have problems because that family member has to leave their job. And also because the person getting the help may prefer to get it not from a family member. Sometimes family relationships are complicated and they don't become support relationships in a good way. Sometimes we need help from people who we're paying, and that's what Medicaid allows us to do. So when I say expand Medicaid home and community-based services, I mean more people should have access to it. Right now, there are long waiting lists to get these services. In many states, it's as long as 10 years. I mean that there should be less strict requirements for who can get it. For example, to be on Medicaid, you can't have any savings, you can't save money. If you save money, they kick you off of Medicaid. And this means that although you're allowed to own things like a house and a car, if you can't have more than $2,000 in the bank, if your car breaks down, no more car for you. You can't get another one. Or you can't pay to fix it. If your house needs a new roof, too bad. You couldn't save money to help with that. So the asset limits and the income limits for Medicaid need to be really radically adjusted. Alex and Maria earlier were talking about sub-minimum wage, which is when a workplace gets a certificate to pay disabled people who work there less than minimum wage. These are usually sheltered workshops, which is a term for where people with disabilities are all put together in one place. It's not in the community, it's usually kind of remote. They all work together. Non-disabled people are in charge of the workplace, and they don't interact with non-disabled people apart from their bosses in their day-to-day. So we want to end sub-minimum wage and increase community and integrated employment, CIE, competitive integrated employment, CIE, which is real work for real pay. We want to increase community-based employment services like job coaching, like job carving, like accommodations for jobs, and more people workplaces getting the support they need to make those changes. So that, and like Maria said, there's a bill, Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, or TICA, that would help with that has been introduced in Congress a few times now. And if you would like to tell your members of Congress that you'd like that bill to pass, that would help us move towards our goal of increasing competitive integrated employment for people with disabilities. We want to end restraint and seclusion in schools. Now, what are restraint and seclusion? Restraint is when a disabled person is held down either by force by someone else using their hands or their body weight or mechanically tied to something. Seclusion is when someone is put in a room by themselves. It's also called isolation. Both of these are dangerous. Both of these can and have killed disabled students before. We want to stop them because disabled students deserve an education that is not traumatizing, that is not life-threatening, that is inclusive, that is kind, that is supportive. So banning restraint and seclusion in schools would be a great step towards that. And like I said earlier, restraint and seclusion disproportionately impacts communities of color, as do all school discipline issues. So suspension or expulsion, things like that also disproportionately impact students of color. We want to promote supported decision-making and alternatives to guardianship. So what is guardianship? Guardianship is when a judge decides that as a disabled person, you aren't going to be able to make your own legal decisions. And so they say, I'm going to pick this person who doesn't have a disability to make your legal decisions. Often that's a family member. If you don't have a close family member, sometimes it's just a random person whose job it is to do this for many people who the state picks. When you can't make your own legal decisions, It's okay for your guardian to decide for you who you get to see, who your friends can be, when you can leave the house, where you can go, what kind of job you can do. Make your medical decisions like what surgery you can or can't have, or what meds you can or can't take, what doctors you can or can't see. Um, Sometimes people under guardianship also lose the right to vote. That depends on the state, and sometimes case by case. So we advocate for alternatives to guardianship like supported decision making, which is a process, and this can look different ways, but a process that allows a disabled person to gather people around them who they trust to advise them on making legal decisions and big life decisions like where to live, what kind of job to do, should I have a hip replacement? Um, should I move in with a roommate? All these kind of questions. And when you think about it, all of us are using supported decision making. Um, Many people would ask a friend or a family member for advice if they're considering moving to a new house, for example. Um, but when you have a developmental disability, if you need help making decisions, sometimes a judge will say, you can't use supported decision making in the way that most people do. Someone else is going to take that right away from you and make those decisions instead of you. We don't believe in that. We believe everyone should have access to supported decision making. I'm going to talk now about ASAN's resources that we have available. We have books on our website, including Loud Hands, which is an anthology of writing about autistic people's experiences, Knowing Why, which is an anthology of writing about the experiences of people who are diagnosed later in life, Welcome to the Autistic Community, which is kind of an introduction to autism for newly diagnosed people or people who are questioning whether they might be autistic, or just anyone who wants to learn more about autism. And Start Here, which is a brief guide for parents of newly diagnosed autistic children. We also offer an online resource called Roadmap to Transition, which will help autistic people, young people, think through what are the steps in their transition to adulthood, whether that's changing from pediatric healthcare to adult healthcare, or whether they want to go into post-secondary education, what kind of job they want to do, things like that. We have many policy education resources available. These are available in plain language and easy read formats. That means that they're more accessible for people with intellectual disabilities to read. Easy read is picture assisted. So even if you have difficulty reading words, if you can get someone to help you with the words, you can follow the pictures, follow along with the icons, and kind of see how the concepts are being brought up and recurring throughout the resource. We also have some video resources available, although not as many as we have in plain language. But our topics that we have resources on are really wide ranging. So we have one about the federal budget process. We have one explaining what Medicaid is. We have one on racial disparities in community living, which means the ways that people of color aren't getting access to community living in the same ways that white disabled people are. We also have fact sheets and videos on COVID-19 in English and Spanish. How can you get involved with ASAN? First, you can go to our website, autisticadvocacy.org. There you can sign up for our newsletter, which is how we send out our action alerts. We tell you when it's time to take action. You can follow our action alerts. We give you scripts to call your elected officials, for example, or send them emails. We tell you how you can help advance our policy goals. We also have a proxy calling program, which is where people can volunteer to make calls to elected officials on behalf of people who can't make phone calls because of a disability, which is really common for autistic people. Also, some people who are hard of hearing, or people with other disabilities like selective mutism, or any reason that you can't or hesitate to use the phone because of your disability. A proxy calling volunteer can help make a call on your behalf. And finally, you can fundraise for ASAN. We have a guide to fundraising for us available on our website. We have a membership program where you can send a small monthly donation and receive fun things from us in return. If you want to learn more about fundraising for ASAN, I'm happy to chat about that. Thank you so much for putting those links in the chat, Christine. That's really helpful. All right. That brings me to the end of my time. I'm a little early here finishing my presentation, so I can take some questions now, or we can go to the combined Q&A with me or Maria. What would folks want to do?
Let's take some questions now.
All right. I see a question in the chat. As a 16-year-old, how can I get involved in my community, Loudoun County, with inclusion activities? Because I have not been successful to arrange a social meetup for teens. Even though I've reached out to many groups on Facebook and Instagram, I have not received any responses. I need direction and help. Okay, this is a great question. A lot of people who are forming groups, for example, for disabled teens, like you said, will use different websites. Meetup is a popular website that you can use to arrange events where people meet each other. If you have an event that you want to spread the word about, you can also contact local organizations, which it sounds like you may have been doing. But try, for example, the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. Your DD Council can help you spread the word. Try your local chapter of the Autism Society or the ARC, which are two different developmental disability organizations. Try other local meetups. Maybe there are meetups for autistic adults that you could ask, do you want to add a meetup for teens? I can help you with that. These are some ways that you can start getting involved in your community. Do I have any other questions? I'm happy to look in the chat or.
There are questions, Zoe.
Oh, great.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing your presentation with us. It contained a lot of great information. One of the questions that we received early on was how to have the discussion with your child to explain to them that they are autistic.
Thank you for that question. This is something that's really important to me. My parents told me that I was disabled when I was 9 years old. And when they told me, I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was so happy because I finally knew what was different about me. I had known there was something that I was not like many other kids, and it was freaking me out because I didn't know why. And so learning about my disability was hugely empowering. It was a big relief. It was a pivotal moment in my life. I really encourage you to tell your kid that they're autistic as soon as possible. You can use age-appropriate language, so whatever age they are at. It's fine to just say, have you noticed that XYZ is hard for you? Have you noticed that some kids do this differently than you, but you do this way? That's because you're autistic. Autism is a disability. Disability is a normal part of human life. It's nothing to be scared of. It's a good thing because it makes you who you are. And that may mean that you may need more help with things as you grow up. We're going to make sure you get that help, that support. We're going to make sure that you get your rights in school. We're looking out for you. And however your disability is affecting you, we're here for you. I think those are important things for kids to know. And I think it's important that kids learn about autism from you in a way that is supportive because they're already getting messages from society that they're different and that's a bad thing. Even if your kid doesn't know they're autistic, they know they're not like other children. They may know, for example, that they don't want to be around other children as much as other children want to be around each other, or that when they try to hang out with other children, it doesn't work somehow. It's not clicking. Or they may know that things are difficult for them that aren't difficult for other people, like having tags in your shirt, or when people are playing on the playground loudly, or when the light is too bright. If they don't know why this is, it's just going to seem to them like they're bad for having those differences. So giving an explanation is super helpful, super important. There are also some great resources that you can use to talk about autism with kids, none of which I can remember off the top of my head, but there are like picture books for this. Oh, check out Sesame Street. Their See Amazing resources include some resources on talking about autism with children.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that and sharing that from your perspective. I go back several years and can recall your child knows, and having an answer to why they feel so differently really helps them process. So I appreciate you sharing that. I also, we have another question in the chat. What steps might be good to take if my workplace does not want to approve telework accommodations for my sensory difficulties with autism?
Okay, there are several things here. First of all, going by the letter of the law, you need your autism documented to get accommodations for it. So if you don't have that documentation, like a neuropsych exam or an exam from a clinician when you were smaller, make sure to get it, make sure to have it ready. If you need help paying for that, there are some places that will do a sliding scale assessment. I don't know what's local to your area, but it is possible in some areas. Your workplace doesn't have to give you telework. They don't have to give you exactly what you ask for, but they do have to give you something. If you say, I'm disabled, I'm experiencing a barrier at work, I need an accommodation, they're generally not allowed to just say, no, no accommodation for you. They have to do what's called an interactive process, where they find out from you, what is the barrier you're experiencing? How is it affecting you? What kind of things might help? And then they can make an offer, and that doesn't have to be what you asked for. It can be something else. For example, they might say, could we give you your own office so you can close the door and not hear the people in the who are around in the office as much rather than working in a cubicle area? Or they might say, can we give you noise canceling headphones? Can we give you sunglasses? What would help for you to do your job and not have those sensory barriers? If you feel like telework is the only thing for you, it's totally fine to fight for that. I'm just letting you know, they don't have to, like, when you ask for an accommodation, legally, they don't have to give you the thing that you ask for. They have to give you something. Um, so that may be a challenge for you in getting the telework accommodations. A resource that you should check out is Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. They have resources on all kind of accommodations, including telework. They can provide some helpful stuff that you can use to explain to your employers why telework is so important for you.
Thank you. We have a question from President Maria Town.
Oh, go ahead, Maria.
Oh, I actually have something to add, but I'm seeing if I can turn it into a question, or I'll just share the example, and then Zoe, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
So Zoe, like you said, autism is genetic, which oftentimes, families will maybe have multiple children who are autistic, and but because of stereotypes, or maybe one child presents with more apparent needs than another, focus is on that child, and the other child is not engaged in a conversation about whether or not they're autistic. And I would actually encourage like families to uh, talk about this both one-on-one with your child who is autistic, and talk about it together as a family, so that everybody, including parents who may also be autistic themselves and not realize it, have an opportunity to better understand themselves and equip themselves with the tools that they need to thrive. Zoe, what do you think about that?
That's a great point. Thank you so much for saying that. And I definitely know many families where there are multiple autistic children, and one had the diagnosis first because of the way they presented, and another person later in life. So certainly, if you have one autistic child, it could be helpful to talk to your other children and say, if you ever need help with things, if you're struggling, if something is not working and you don't know why, you can always come to me. I can help you navigate those things. And just see what emerges. If they're not autistic, it won't be bad for them to approach you when they're struggling, even if what they're struggling with is stuff that non-autistic people struggle with. So there's no harm in saying that. But I definitely agree that the whole family should have this conversation about disabilities and what it means for them as a family, and how everyone can get their needs met.
Wonderful. We have another question from one of our alumni, Darlene Kelly, who her daughter, she is 40 this summer, told her 15 years ago she suspected she was autistic. Once she learned about it, she could clearly see the signs. She knew there was a difference, but did not connect the dots for her to understand. So the question is, how can she get the rest of the family to understand and stop thinking and claiming her difference as an excuse? How do you help your adult children with autism in a way that is not enabling but helpful?
So let's reframe this idea of the excuse. Because often what I find is when people say, oh, you're just using your disability as an excuse, it's something that doesn't need excusing in the first place. Like, let's say I go to Thanksgiving and there's many people there and it's loud and I'm wearing my headphones at the table. You could say, that's rude. You don't get to do that just because of your disability. You're using your disability as an excuse. To which I would say, does it matter whether I'm disabled? I'm uncomfortable and the headphones make me comfortable. There's nothing morally wrong that I'm doing. It's fine to wear headphones at the table. I don't need an excuse. But it does happen that I am disabled, and that's why I'm doing this, if that helps you. Same for things like, taking breaks if stuff gets loud, walking outside, um, not coming to an event that might be too much. Whatever it is that your family is saying your daughter is using her disability as an excuse to do or not do. These usually aren't things that are like morally wrong, regardless of the context. They're just things that are different. You don't need an excuse to be different. So that's what I would say to your family.
Yeah.
In terms of, sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. These are more like procrastination or not working or not living up to the,
Oh, I see.
that type of thing.
Yeah. Um, so why someone isn't living their life the way that other people expected them to, that can be really painful for people with many different kinds of disabilities.
Right.
What I would say is that everyone moves through life differently, and that disability can affect stuff like, for example, whether you're able to access post-secondary education, whether you're able to make employment work for you, especially if you don't find a supportive employer, how quickly you can get things done. I talked about executive functioning earlier, hugely important part of autism. We have a resource called Welcome to the Autistic Community that will help people who don't know about autism learn more about it. It's not just for autistic people, it's for anyone who wants to learn more. I recommend it as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another question. How can we improve access to autism diagnosis for adults, girls, and people of color who are often overlooked?
So in several ways. One is to, when the autism diagnosis is being reworked, and it is reworked periodically, to try and make sure that our criteria for diagnosing autism are not excluding anyone. And to make sure that clinicians whose job it is to diagnose autism are aware of ways that gender, age, culture, can all affect the way that someone's autism presents or is reported to them. So, for example, not all cultures make a lot of eye contact. In the US, we generally do, but that's different from place to place. So parents may not report, oh, my kid isn't making eye contact, and that's a big problem, because to them it's normal. But the kid could still be autistic. That's just an example of a way that autism could be culturally mediated. Autistic people who are assigned female at birth, more likely to have certain traits of autism than others. In some cases, you hear about internalizing versus externalizing traits. That becomes a factor. And then as people age, clinicians need to be aware autism at, 19, 20, 40 doesn't look the same as autism at 5. And it's important to know how a person behaved as a child, because our criteria currently are so focused on how children present. So it's important to get that history. This is why in the DSM-5, it says you must present these autism traits currently or by history, which means when you were younger. So if you have like stopped, for example, if you used to flap your hands all the time as a kid, and then you stopped doing it because everyone was telling you not to, and like you were getting into lots of trouble for doing it, that doesn't mean that you're not autistic. It means that you developed a way to suppress your autistic traits. So the fact that you used to do that is relevant for the clinician to know.
We have two questions, and we're going to open it back up now at 1:35 to both Maria and to Zoe. This question is for you, Zoe. Can you share with us your motivation, your passion, the impetus for you establishing the annual Disability Day of Mourning Vigil? I found that to be so intriguing when I read your bio. I was just wondering how that came about.
Thank you for asking. So when I was 21, I took a semester off from college because college was being really difficult for me. And I went home to the San Francisco Bay Area. And near my local community, there was a murder of an autistic adult. He was murdered by his mother. The adult was named George Hodgins. He was murdered by his mother. It was a murder-suicide. And the way it was covered in the media was really concerning to me because it was a lot of journalists would find other parents of autistic children, whether adults or children, and would ask those people, "Do you understand why she did it?" And those people would say, "Yes, I understand why she did it." And that to me felt like they were making excuses for the murder. Like, people gave quotes like, "Oh, all parents have moments where they want to do that," or like, "We don't have enough services and that's why she did it." Like really saying things that I felt weren't respectful of George's life because of how much they centered his murder and made excuses for her decision to murder him. And I heard that a local group was going to hold a joint vigil for both of them. And that felt really wrong to me. So I decided to hold a vigil for George Hodgins, who didn't decide to die, whose life was taken away from him, who will never again be able to enjoy the things that he enjoyed in life, like soccer and going to the Disney store at the local mall, because someone else made the decision that he should die. And that was the beginning of Disability Day of Mourning.
Wow. Congratulations and kudos to you for your courage in doing that and recognizing the need for it to be done.
Thank you so
My
much.
second question is for President Town. I listened to your presentation as you talked about the internship program, and I was floored when you said that the majority of your participants who go on to get full-time positions, et cetera, their salaries exceed. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and do you use that as a major marketing point when you go on the Hill?
Thank you, Penny. And so the report that I'm cited is new. We released that in December. So we do use it now. But one of the reasons that we actually conducted the evaluation is because we did not have good data on the impact of our overall program. We knew that it was making a big difference because we see many of our alumni be very successful in their fields and actually go on to be like leaders in their fields, like Zoe, not to put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that you hear very often when it comes to disability employment, especially in the accommodations conversation, is that most accommodations are free and the average cost of accommodations is $50 or less. And one of the reasons that that is such a common talking point is because I think people are afraid that when you talk about accommodations, employers will instantly think that this is going to be expensive and they won't want to hire you because you're going to cost them money. But I think when we use talking points like that, what we're saying is don't invest in us.
Mm.
And part of why I'm really excited about this evaluation and to have this data is it shows that investing in people with disabilities as they transition from school to work is worth it in the long run. And so we're using that report to do a few different things. AAPD's internship program is fairly unique, and that should not be the case. Every year we get way more applications than we can actually accept in our cohorts, and we want more programs like ours to exist across the country because there is a need and a demand for them. So we're hoping to talk to different employers, folks in the workforce development space to try to build more programs like this. We also want to use it to advance our policy priorities on the Hill, like the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, and like the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. One of the issues that we encounter with our internship programs every summer and every fall is interns who are afraid to get paid because they're afraid of losing their benefits. And we have to become benefits counselors. And, we'll talk about things like ABLE accounts. And sometimes the fear is so strong that people will ask us not to pay them. And that is not acceptable. And so we we use this to say, like, disabled people want to work, they want to earn money. One of the other things you'll hear people say about folks with disabilities, especially intellectual and developmental disabilities, is they don't care about money, or money doesn't matter to them. They just want a meaningful day.
That's not true.
Not true at all. It's not true at all. And so we are using that report to try to dispel that myth, and to also just continue to highlight the need for programs that support the hiring of people with disabilities, either into the public or private sector.
And I have one final, and then I'll shift it back to if there are any others. President Town, in your presentation, you mentioned about being document ready, right, to produce and to prove that you have a diagnosis, et cetera. And for those adults who have not had an official diagnosis, I had a conversation recently with a staff member who was just sharing how difficult and challenging it has been trying to secure one. Are there any tips or strategies? Ultimately, you try to go to your personal care physician or someone who knows, et cetera. But I know that we have several alumni who are struggling with getting that. I wonder if there are any tips or strategies.
That's such a great question, and I'm gonna tap Zoe in to help answer this. One thing I'll share is, let's say that you are trying to pursue an autism diagnosis, okay? And you're struggling to get the autism assessment, but you have very clearly impacted speech or very clearly impacted mental health. And those things are all related to the autism. But what you could also do is pursue separate diagnoses for your speech delays or speech disabilities, or a separate diagnosis for your mental health condition. And I want to just note, like, that's not ideal, but what we're trying to do here is make sure people don't lose their health care. So the goal is not necessarily getting the most accurate diagnosis, it's getting a diagnosis that will help. And I have a friend who when he was a child, he never had an autism diagnosis, but he had diagnoses for a speech delay, for a learning disability like dyslexia, for executive function. He had diagnoses for everything else, right? And was able to get many different types of interventions that have ultimately supported him in adulthood, even though he did not have a explicit autism diagnosis. And I think that that's a strategy a lot of people will have to use. Zoe, do you have anything you want to add there?
Here's an interesting question in the chat as well. How do you address the fear of a diagnosis for those with high anxiety that they may be categorized or lose their independence?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are pros and cons to an official diagnosis. And I always tell people this, if you're considering a diagnosis, think about how your disability affects you. Think about, what the laws are in your state, for example. Sometimes it's legitimate for states to use someone's disability to remove children from the home, or in a custody battle, for example. Um, so that's something you should like, not to scare anyone off of official diagnosis. It's just a factor. Um, if you want to move to another country, you may not want an autism diagnosis because many countries, if you have that diagnosis, will say, no, you can't move here. Stuff like that. So those fears are real. At the same time, if people are worried about like losing their independence if they get a diagnosis, I would say the autistic people who are having their independence taken away, who are being put under guardianship, are usually people who, their disability, whether they had a diagnosis of autism or something else, was very plain very early on. No one could hide it. Um, it's uh it's like a different situation. If you've been living independently up to now, an autism diagnosis is probably not going to make someone swoop in and take that away from you. Um, Not to say that like that never happens, but it's a more complicated situation than like, oh, I got a diagnosis and now I'm put under guardianship. It's more like, family machinations or like other stuff leading to that. Um, yeah, a diagnosis, it's not straightforward whether or not you should get one. But I encourage everyone to look into it and do what is best for them.
And I'll add on the question of anxiety and independence. I actually think that sometimes getting a diagnosis can help you be more independent, because it can help you basically identify a path for resources that may not have otherwise been evident or available to you and those around you. Um, Whether or not it's something like autism or a mental health disability or even a chronic health disability that people are viewing as, you're just not managing what you eat well, you're sleeping all the time, right? And people start to wonder whether or not you can really make it on your own. If you actually gain more information about yourself, that actually the reason you're so fatigued all the time is because you have Ehlers-Danlos, right? Or long COVID. That can help you and others understand what it will actually take for you to flourish in your environment. And so the question of, should I get diagnosed or not? Is that a safe choice for me? Is a really big one, especially right now, when we don't know how the federal government is using Medicaid data. But on the question of maintaining access to healthcare, at this point, a diagnosis will be a critical tool for people to use.
While we are entertaining any final questions, it's 1:48. We're going to launch the poll, the evaluation poll for the session. Please share with us your thoughts and any recommendations you may have for us. Are there any other questions, Christine, that came up through the chat that we might want to?
Not that I see coming through the chat, Dr. Penny, but this could be for either Zoe or President Town. What alternatives to restraint and seclusion should school systems adopt or create to make a more supportive learning environment?
I'm happy to take this. So first of all, restraint and seclusion are often, like legally, they're only used in emergencies. In reality, they're often used as punishment. Or like as a response to a kid doing a behavior that's unexpected or that seems defiant of the teacher. I've heard of kids being restrained for like spitting in their classroom, for example, or something like that. So, often the alternative to restraint or seclusion is just don't do that. And everyone will be fine. Tell the kid, we don't spit in this classroom and move on with your day. Um, if someone is doing something where like, if the kid is about to run into a highway and like be in traffic, there's no restraint and seclusion ban that will stop you from grabbing that kid's arm to stop them from running into the highway. Every ban on restraint and seclusion is like in an emergency circumstance. If someone is about to, do something really dangerous, you can hold on to them to stop them. But that said, often alternatives to restraint and seclusion, if someone is doing something that could harm them or someone else is like moving away from them, moving other people away from them. It's better to get all the other kids out of the classroom if someone is like struggling with aggression than to restrain that one person. Um, it's safer for the person who's having the problem at the moment. It's safer for the person who would be asked to restrain them. It's less traumatizing for everyone involved than to restrain that person. There are also things that people do, like if they work with kids who have these issues often, have a big padded surface and just hold that. And if the person is going to punch something, they can punch that big padded surface and they won't punch you. And you don't have to punch them or sit on them or like do other things that might really harm them and traumatize them. So those are some examples. Oh
I see.
gosh, I didn't even get into addressing the root cause of behavior.
That's what I was going to add. Go for
Yes.
it, Zoe.
This is really important. Why is someone doing things that could harm themselves or others? It may be because of underlying chronic pain, for example. A lot of autistic kids, let's say they're banging their head on the wall. That looks really scary, and you may say, there's no way I could understand why they're doing that. The first thing you should do is take them to the doctor and run many tests to see if you can understand why they're doing that. You can learn more about this on the website Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, where they have, if you search aggression, they have like a checklist of medical things you should check if someone is showing aggressive or self-injurious behaviors. It may be frustration with something that's going on in the classroom. They may need a better way to express that. They may not have access to communication, and getting them access to communication may resolve the issue. The underlying, why are they doing the thing? That's really important.
I am going to yield to the last question. And while we're doing that, I want to ask our executive director, Terry, to get ready to express her gratefulness. And Kelly, Vanilla, you have the last question.
Hi, Zoe and Maria. Thank you so much for all the information you provided. I guess my question is, since there was some discussion in regard to late diagnosis, and maybe there's situations too where diagnosis was not shared with an individual at a younger age, what would be your best advice or go-to resources in regard to adults with autism, whether they're newly diagnosed or discovering their diagnosis, what have you? What resources can they utilize to ensure that they have care providers that are knowledgeable about their needs in regard to autism specifically, and co-occurring conditions like sensory processing disorders, et cetera?
For communicating about your disability with healthcare providers, I would recommend the Aspire Autism Healthcare Toolkit. That's Aspire, AASPIRE. This is a project in a university in Oregon that it's autistic led, and they make resources for autistic people like these healthcare resources, and they also conduct their own research. So this is a great place to start.
Thank you.
Can I add two things?
Yeah.
I would also look at something called the WITH Foundation and the projects that they fund. The WITH Foundation focuses on healthcare and people with developmental disabilities, and they've done a lot on healthcare and autism. Finally, I will add, just because I'm here representing a cross-disability organization, that folks with autism benefit from knowing about the broader disability community and all of the people and places and things happening in the disability community writ large. And there are so many great books and blogs and videos to watch. One book I always recommend is Disability Visibility. It's an edited essay collection by Alice Wong. It includes so many different stories and perspectives from people with disabilities, and it can be really helpful for folks to understand that their identity as a disabled person makes them a part of something bigger, and a bigger community and movement that is changing our world for the better.
Thank you, Maria. Could you tell me, was that the WITH Foundation?
WITH, WITH.
Thank you.
And thank you to Christine, who's putting everything in the chat that we mentioned. That's super helpful.
Terry?
Well, this has just been so full of such great information and insights, and just really practical advice and recommendations. Zoe and Maria, I thank you so much for joining us today. And you know what I have found so powerful about, this event, but also our statewide workshops is the development of community that we are, really embracing. All the people here today, the great recommendations, the great questions, the, sharing information is just so important as, in your work as national organizations and our work as a state DD council. The resources are extremely helpful. And I would also encourage folks to look at some of your local resources for some of the questions. There's the Autism Society of Central Virginia that may have some really specific and helpful resources for adults who are looking for a diagnosis. There may be other, local autism associations that know, locally what's happening, the ARC chapters. There's also the Family to Family Network at the Partnership for People with Disabilities that provides, is another family member to provide you with support, share resources, information, connect you with other families who maybe have experienced what you're experiencing. So there are, look at those local networking resources as well. And then I also wanted to mention this past General Assembly, the 2026 General Assembly session, House Bill 298 passed. It had been introduced a number of times, but it was passed and signed into law, and it requires restorative disciplinary practices in schools for really looking at, before suspension, expulsion, removal from the classroom, what schools and teachers need to be doing to support students, in those environments. So I encourage you to look at House Bill 298, Dolores McQuinn. It goes into effect, I think, July 2027. So, those of you who are concerned about that, there's another resource and to follow. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on a beautiful Friday afternoon. Really wonderful discussion and just great community building.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Let me say thank you to President Town and to Zoe. This was, as Terry, an outstanding, so informative, and I concur, ditto to what Terry said. The community, the outreach, the relationship, the partnership, the collaboration building that we are doing across the country with national organizations such as yourselves. We really thank you because we know this is a busy month for you. And President Town, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to actually do the presenting for us today. And Zoe, it has been such a wonderful, marvelous privilege to meet you and to hear your presentation today. I know I leave today like the others, just full of more knowledge and energy and a greater commitment to celebrating autism. Just as an aside, this week in the city of Richmond, on our news, we just heard of a situation where an elementary student was being escorted with autism out of the elementary school to get her bus, and a staff member abused the child by biting their fingers or whatever. And the parent found out because someone had a clip. So this, the work that we do at Virginia Board and exposing, talking about these subjects, giving people an opportunity to get questions answered, even just having connections with the resources, very, very powerful. So thank you both for what you've done for us today. And I know that I'm proud to work for Virginia Board because, as you mentioned, Rev Up and Virginia being very at the forefront of that movement, we certainly have representation and we participate in that. And so thank you again. I simply want at 1:59, if I can do this very quickly, to share. Can you see that? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We simply want to say thank you to all of our supporters for participating in this state year's continuing education workshop session. July 1st, we began in 2025 and we're concluding now on today, April 17th. The state year ends on June 30th, 2026. We have literally produced, and I see that I've already clicked it, but we have literally produced 7 statewide continuing education workshop sessions, and we have touched the lives of some 2,814 registrants, participants, viewers on our Facebook page, and we're just so excited. On behalf of Virginia Board and more specifically, the Training and Alumni Development Program team, which consists of Christine Jeremiah as our ADP or Alumni Development Program Coordinator and Training Coordinator, and Kelly Vanilla, our Training Coordinator, and all of the interpreters, all of the captioners that have worked with us, to Nia Harrison, who has been in the room with us, our Director of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, to Anita from Communications, our manager, BBC, Boydnott Visual Communication, and every single person that helps us deliver these statewide continuing education workshop sessions. We thank you. We thank you. Thank you to all of our registrants and our participants. And we acknowledge the presence today of our Virginia Board for People with Disabilities chairperson of our board, Allison Cole Johnson, has been with us, and all of our alumni. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We will look forward to seeing you in September of 2026 for our first new state year session. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Bye.
Bye, Dr.
Thank you,
Penny.
Dr.
See you
Penny.
next time.